Hello everybody and welcome to our live stream. Great to be doing this on a Monday morning after an eventful weekend, gotta say. And we might even squeeze another one in before the Singapore Grand Prix this weekend. Big weekend all round, as I say, lots going on. Even if you weren't interested in golf, I think the last day of the Ryder Cup, well indeed all 3 days of the Ryder Cup, depends what side you were cheering for, were pretty momentous. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But motor racing wise, before we get on to your questions and comments, and don't forget of course that we will be going through as many of those as we can. This probably won't be the longest live stream I've ever done in my life, but it'll be hopefully long enough to for everybody to have a bit of a laugh, if nothing else. But yeah, getting back to the weekend, wow. Weekend for the Verstappen family, gotta say. Max doing his thing at the Nürburgring on the proper circuit, the North Circuit, the long circuit we used to call it, 15 miles. It was never known as the Green Hell or whatever they call it now, or even the Nordschleife. Whenever we went to the Nürburgring, it was always just the German Grand Prix at the ring. I suppose that's because the South Circuit it did exist, not the Grand Prix circuit, the new one, but the South Circuit did exist, but they only held one proper motor race there a year, and that was the Eifelrennen in April or March, I think, very early in the year, very cold. Get onto that in a second. So really there was no reason to distinguish the North Circuit from anything else. It was just the ring is what we call it. Oh, going to the ring. Okay, cool. And everybody knew what you were talking about. Anyway, Max obviously has always wanted to race at the ring for obvious reasons. The same reason I go on about how instead of building these rather bland triple DRS circuits in the middle of nowhere to get countries into the Grand Prix calendar with lots of money, they should indeed encourage those countries to build replicas of the great Grand Prix circuits in the middle of nowhere, so that we actually have a Nürburgring built to the spec of 2025, and we have a Brands Hatch, and we have an old Spa, and we have whatever you want. You could create a lot of circuits, and I've often said, wouldn't that be wonderful if we did that? And I think it'd be a great thing, because they'd do track days all, well, 365, wouldn't they, as they do at the Nürburgring when they're not racing Grand Prix. Anyway, it doesn't happen, and Max has gone out and competed in an event, GT3 round of the German long-distance GT3 championship, and qualified third, won the race. What do you expect? For me, this was a case study in how simple Max keeps his racing. Everything was, I mean, he could have made a massive song and dance about it. So could Red Bull. The fact that he was going to be in a Ferrari and they were going to give permission or whatever, another driver in another situation would have gone through. The team would have made a massive palaver about it, but there was none of that. And I think a lot of that is Max just saying, no, keep it low key. We don't want all that. Red Bull are sponsoring him in this thing, and yet if you go to the Red Bull media site, there's no mention of Max doing the race. I think that's brilliant. And yeah, just a racing driver wants to get on with it. So I think that helped keep the whole thing very simple. And you can see, if you look at lots of nice YouTube there of him in the garage at the Nürburgring and getting in the car, and everything is just calm and simple, and he's just enjoying himself, and everything's very professional. And he goes out and does the job, takes the lead at the first corner. Yeah, you got to say the opposition wasn't, in terms of driving, wasn't formidable. But there's always going to be a couple of hot shots who do these championships, who really know their way around them. And Max just blew them away and won the race. And here he is in that Ferrari, which was as I say, it's quite a big thing, really, for a Red Bull 4 times world champion to be out there in a Ferrari. And not a lot said about it in terms of Ferrari are delighted or Red Bull have got permission from Ferrari, all that rubbish. No, just went out, Ferrari 296, lovely car, GT3, and looks great in that livery too. I suspect Max had quite a lot to do with that livery. The whole Verstappen.com thing, you go to their website, it's a little bit weird. It's not up to date in some areas, but it's very good. And here he is on the podium. He shared the car with a good guy, an English guy. Shouldn't be underrated in any way, really, because he's Chris Lallam's been very. I mean, iRacing, I think, is probably where they met. But he's a racer. You know, he's done well in radicals and things that matter. Anybody who races radicals well has my endorsement. And there he is on the podium. I love those garlands, unique to the German racers. We used to see those you see pictures of Innes Island or Joe Bonnier at Solitude that have one of those, or Edgar Bart at the Nürburgring that have one of those lovely, it's like a tire really, isn't it, around their neck. And Max just looks so cool and so appropriate. I think the whole thing was very well done. Meanwhile, simultaneously, his dad, Jos, was competing in the East Belgian Rally near St. Vith, which is virtually the hometown of Thierry Neuville. Get onto that in a minute as well. And he had in the balance, he could clinch the Belgian Rally Championship. And he did that in style, finishing second in Rally 2 and third overall in the rally. That's Jos Verstappen. His son's out racing at the Nürburgring. I think this just shows a lot of why there's so much racing blood in that family. Just really good to see that. As I say, Thierry Neuville, hometown Grand Prix rally, if you like. It was just testing, I think, for the upcoming Central European rally. So he wasn't eligible for the results, but he blitzed every stage and effectively won it by I don't know how much, but good for him. And it's just great for the spectators, isn't it, to see. It's a bit like Max doing the Nürburgring and all the German fans seeing Max at the Nürburgring. And there's Thierry Neuville doing a local event in a Rally 1 Hyundai. And all the fans would have loved it. Well, they did love it for sure. So there was that. And then just going back to, I was mentioning I thought it was a lovely picture, mentioning the Eiffelrennen race on the South Circuit. There's another driver that just liked racing for the sake of it and driving for the sake of it. That's Jim Clark in the factory Lotus 48. Sadly, the type of car in which he lost his life the following year. But there he is going into the South Circuit, the Eiffelrennen of the Nürburgring in 1967 Formula 2 race. Snow, ice. There was a lot of talk before the race about abandoning it, not racing. And Jim was one of the drivers that said, no, look at all those fans, look at all those spectators that have paid to watch us. We're going to have to go out there and race. And he did so with the snow. So, yeah, very impressive. Typical. I mean, it's not unlike, there's a bit of a link there with Max, isn't it? I'm sure a lot of people said, oh, Max, do you think you should do that? Sponsors, Ferrari, Nürburgring, dangerous, whatever, but he just went out and did it. And I think that says a lot about Max and how simple he keeps his racing, how big a part racing and driving is of his life, A, and B, how simple he keeps it, which is wonderful to see. And that's why he's so good in Formula One as well. Speaking of which, and we're getting on to the similarity now. You're going to think, what is Windsor on about? But believe me, there is method to my madness. Going back now to golf and the Ryder Cup, and there is a direct parallel, unique parallel with Formula One in what we saw in the Ryder Cup at the weekend at Bethpage Black, in New York, where the Europeans trounced the Americans over the first 2 days, which were mixed matches. For those who don't know about golf, normally it's just an individual playing the course, basically, and then, you're aware of what the other players are doing, but ultimately it's you and the course, which makes the sport unique in that respect. But then what they do at the first 2 days of the Ryder Cup is that you are paired with another player from your team, and you play either alternate balls. He hits the ball, then you hit that ball, vice versa, or you both hit a ball and you take the best score, whoever gets it. In other words, you're paired up with somebody. And the really interesting thing there for me was that Scotty Scheffler, who's the number one golfer in the world, lost all four of his paired matches, the 4-ball and the foursomes, all four. They played two on Friday, two on Saturday, and he lost them all. And Tiger Woods, another former number one, potentially one of the greatest golfers of all time, similarly appalling record in the Ryder Cup. Whenever he had to, there's Scheffler, there's Woods. Whenever he had to pair with another player, his record was incredibly bad. And I say there's a parallel here because, for me, and nobody in the golfing world is saying this, maybe because they don't follow Formula One at all. But for me, this is the Michael Schumacher thing. This is the thing of that he initiated really at the level that he did. Of if you want me at Ferrari and if you want me to be world champion, I don't want somebody in the other car who's going to detract from what I do. I want somebody who's comfortable, who's not going to be a problem, who's going to do all the donkey work for me, who can win Grand Prix if the car is good enough and I have a problem with my car, fine. But I don't want anybody taking points from me. I don't want anybody coming into my peripheral vision when I'm in the garage. And it worked well for him, as we know, all those world championships. And that's why Max Verstappen, one of the reasons Max Verstappen is so good is because he's always had a teammate that he can kind of dominate without too much problem. Now, if you'd had, for example, Mika Hakkinen in the other Ferrari when Michael was racing, I don't think Michael would have been as good as he was. And equally, I think if you had George Russell or Charles Leclerc in the other Red Bull, I don't think Max would be as good as he is. Of course, he'd be as quick as he is, but would he be as good as keeping everything simple and organized around that world that he's created, that we saw effectively at the Nürburgring? I don't think he would. And I think that's the problem. When you are a number one golfer and you've got to, and you hit a ball and you hit a good drive, and then your teammate, let's call him a teammate, then takes your drive and puts it into the light rough just in front of the green, when you know you would have been on the green, no problem at all, 12 feet from the pin, and then you got to play that guy's bad shot. They don't think, this is a pain, or why didn't he hit a better shot? Because they're totally into the whole rah USA thing. They're totally into that. It doesn't even, but subconsciously, it's definitely there that they are suddenly not playing for themselves. They're playing around an environment. And as much as they may say, and as much as others may say they are brilliant team players, they're always there, they're happy to do this, happy to do that, ultimately, a Scotty Scheffler or a Tiger Woods does not need another golfer impinging on his peripheral vision, and it affects the way they play. And you may say, okay, well, what about Rory McIlroy on the European side, who's the world's number 2? And as good as Scheffler, and had a brilliant record in the pairings, and has had a brilliant record in the pairings for so long, as did Seve Ballesteros years ago, and as does Tommy Fleetwood now, or even many of the European players. Well, the difference is, of course, that the way the Americans progress in the golfing world is very clinical and very linear and very focused on their own performance, whereas in Europe, generally, the backgrounds are a bit tougher and they have to make allowances and there's a bit more compromise, and it's just a wider range of experience you get playing in Europe. In America, it's just like, if you don't do it this way, the college system, and if you haven't won this and you haven't won that, you will not then progress to the next stage. And because of that, that's very like the Michael Schumacher way of how he progressed in motor racing. Straight in, Mercedes driver, straight in, Benetton, Flavio Briatore, Ferrari, bang, and then Mercedes at the end. It was just a bit like Max today, you could say. And I think Max would have the same problem. As I say, Max would suffer if he had somebody like Charles Leclerc in the other car, in the way Scotty Scheffler suffers if he has somebody like, Justin Thomas next to him, or whoever it was. And so that's it. That's the parallel. And I don't think that applies to any other sport, because they're either team sports in a big way, like football, or they're one-on-one opponent sports like tennis, And so it's only this parallel. And I think it's fascinating to have seen that. In other words, it was quite easy to predict, as one did, that Scheffler was going to have a really, really bad 2 days before he went into the singles. Of course, in the singles, it's a different thing. He's playing for himself again. Of course, he won. No surprise. But when he's got to play team golf, big problem. And he's played other team golf matches and done well, but of course the Ryder Cup, completely different environment, and that is where it comes into your peripheral vision. He didn't let it come in. His side of the garage was not affected by the other side when he was playing those other competitions, because they weren't anything like as big as the Ryder Cup. So that's my solution to everything, really. There you go. So yeah, good. And you can always draw these parallels, I think. And the final parallel is, I'd love to see Max Verstappen in a rally car. I'd love to see how he drives it. And I think he'd drive it very much as he drives a Formula One car. He definitely, I mean, as Rob Wilson said in that interview quite recently, you know, rally drivers, short corners still come into play, and you can overdo it as well. Of course, there are moments when you need to really be sideways, but you can overdo it in a rally car, and Max would be brilliant to watch. I'm amazed that, not amazed, I'm delighted that Joss has done so well, because he was pretty oversteery and pretty driving on the rear sort of driver. Sort of, I would characterize him as sort of Liam Lawson type driver when he was in Formula One, and yet he's really adapted well to rally, because you can't be super quick if you're always throwing the car sideways, handbrakes and so forth. And he's obviously doing really well on that. One other final comment was, over in Japan, meanwhile, Alpine actually won a round of the WEC. Look at that thing. It's pretty ugly, isn't it? But the blue and everything, it's quite a cool operation. Mick Schumacher was in the other car, didn't have much luck. But this car, driven by Ferdinand Habsburg, who's one of my mates, who I'm very pleased to see get that result. Very good driver, Ferdy, and should have had a much better launch from Formula 3, where he was so quick. But anyway, he's found a home there, obviously, at Alpine, and that's great, in WEC. And the other two drivers, Pierre-Luc Chatin and Charles Milesi, very good. I mean, lots going on with the Jota cars and the Porsches and everything else, and it was a bit of an odd race, quite a lot of shunts. Fuji's not my favourite circuit by any means. But good to see. Congratulations to Alpine and my mate, Ferdinand. Very good. Right, enough of all that rubbish. Let's get on with your questions now. Because that's what you're really all here for, isn't it? Let's get the browser going. 1 second. Where are we? OBS. Here we go. Browser. There we go. Oscar Bekalu. Hi there, Oscar. Hi, Peter. When is the next Lewis interview coming? Oh, well. Yeah, I've actually put in a few applications. Actually, I have to say I haven't done one since he went to Ferrari, but in the Merc years, the last couple of years, the reply always came back, could you tell us what questions you want to ask? And to be honest with you, it may sound arrogant, but whenever anybody from any institution, team, race team, whatever, comes back and asks that, I just press delete from the email and I give up. And I don't pursue it further, because for two reasons. One, an interview is not about set questions. It's about a chat and me feeding off what he's saying. So how do I know what he's going to say? How can I give you any sort of guideline of that? And B, I think it's quite rude, really. It shows that you're not confident in... No, not rude's not the right word. It just shows that you're wary of everything that's going on, and the whole atmosphere is going to be very controlled, and I'm not into that. If it's a nice chat, open-ended, fine, but otherwise forget it. I'll try it Ferrari, though. It's a good point, Oscar. Thank you very much. I'll see how they react. I suspect it'll be more or less the same thing. Luca Veronese. Hi, Peter. Did you watch Max taking everyone to school in his first Nürburgring race? I did. Started P3, got the lead after turn 1, 65-second gap after his 2 stints, 3 seconds shy of the lap record. Yeah, absolutely wonderful to watch. I mean, it was a long race, wasn't it? It was a 4-hour race, so there's a limit to how much you can actually watch. And of course, it wasn't, I suppose we get a bit used to the whole Formula One TV production thing. It wasn't quite that graphic, but it's good shots. You know, it's lovely to see the Nürburgring, lovely to see Max driving that car so well. And you could see, you know, everything was just neat and tidy and precise. And as I say, you just kept everything very simple. Luca goes on to say, Max is doing great things for motorsport in general, excuse me, generating a lot of hype just by getting involved in other competitions. He is. But it's not only Max. Give credit, please, to Red Bull for allowing him to do this. Or put it another way, not stopping him from doing this and staying quiet in the background. Can you imagine if one of the McLaren drivers or one of the Merc drivers we're going to race a Ferrari somewhere? Can you imagine the whole palaver that would be happening with the team? But they didn't at the Red Bull. They just let him get on with it quietly. It's just like, oh yeah, that's what Max is doing. No problem. I think that is part of the reason he did it, because he knew it would be nice and simple. And maybe that's one of the reasons he doesn't really want to leave Red Bull, because they're very good at just keeping things at the right level. They're a race team, ultimately. They're not out there. Of course, Red Bull is a brand and it's a drink, but they let Red Bull get on with that side of things. As a race team, they do what they want, and I think it's great. And all credit to Max and to Verstappen.com actually, and to Red Bull for allowing that to happen. Pranay Sharma, hi Peter, can Carlos Sainz or Lando Norris or Piastri or Russell, any of the longer corner drivers, achieve Senna level of smoothness and precision? I'd say the nearest of those would be George Russell. But Senna had a silkiness to his touch that I think George lacks. George has relatively spiky inputs, steering, throttle, brakes, compared with Senna. Compared with everybody else, he's pretty good. But compared with Senna, I would say not quite as silky smooth as Senna. And it would be lovely to say that Senna was more consistently quick on that way of driving. But of course, he did make his mistakes. The classic was the Alex Albon type hit the apex at Poitiers. That was a mistake caused by lack of concentration when he was starting to think about should he go any quicker with Alain Prost as far back as he was, and if he backs off, how much should he... Actually, here I am tangling myself up with words. I think what happened there is he decided actually to drive a little bit more cautiously and a little bit slower. And as a result, he made a mistake. And it's a good example of why it's very difficult to drive off the pace, to drive a little bit slower. Very difficult. The only way really to drive in a rally car, race car, whatever, is basically on the limit or thereabouts. Otherwise, you are going to make mistakes. I remember, was it, where was that then? I think it was Nigel behind Prost at Ferrari in 90. Where was it? I can't remember the actual circuit. But anyway, I remember talking to Nigel afterwards. His engine was slightly down and he was stuck behind Prost. He felt he was quicker everywhere, as he would, round corners. But Prost was always getting away from him. And they were sort of stuck in a group of about four, and Nigel was at the back of the group. And in the end, he just sort of went over a curb and damaged the bottom of the car quite badly. And it was just like, that was the sort of mistake he'd never make on the limit. But it was a mistake he made because he was just cruising around and getting bored. And I think that's a little bit what Ayrton did. Anyway, getting back to the point, the other shunts Ayrton had, putting aside, of course, his last, well, you could include it because I think it's similar. We're just Ayrton going over the threshold of what was possible physically for the car, but doing it anyway to see what would happen. Formula 3 shunt at Cadwell Park, very good example. Can that jump be taken flat even though there's a left-hander immediately afterwards? Answer, I'm going to try. Answer, no, here I am in the Marshall's barrier. And they were the sort of shunts that Ayrton had. But otherwise, I don't think I've ever seen, as much as you, from the outside looking in, as much as you can do that, I don't think I've seen a driver make fewer driving errors with the style that he had, braking very late and turning in late, long corners, because that engenders errors by definition, whether it be a bump in the road with the brake pedal, whether it be turning the steering a fraction late, fraction early, fraction too aggressively. All those things show up in that style of driving, but Ayrton very, very rarely made mistakes. And I think George, you don't see George making that many mistakes, but you do see George backing away a little bit, I think, from what's just happened the previous lap, whereas Ayrton would never do that. So I would say George, could continue along that level. Of course, one of the things that Senna had that George doesn't have is lots and lots and lots of actual real testing in the real race car. Whereas George's testing is basically in a sim, you could argue. I don't think he does any days with Rob. So in that sense, it's much more difficult for a guy like George to improve because he's not doing hundreds and hundreds of miles of testing every day. And Ayrton loved testing. As far as I know, he loved it because it was just, he was learning things all the time about his driving and about the car. I don't see Carlos doing that. I think those two guys, Carlos and Oscar, now I'd say drive too much on the rear of the car to be getting near the Senna area of operation. And Lando, I just don't think, I think he steps away a lot when the car doesn't feel right, or he's not able to manipulate the car quite as well as George or Senna when the balance goes. With Senna, it was difficult to tell if he'd lost the balance or not. It would still look pretty much on rails. So yeah, good question. Thank you very much. Jez James. Hi Jez. Peter, please could you enlighten me, as I don't quite understand why Pirelli don't design a tyre to last a whole race. I would have thought that designing a tyre that does is better for Formula One and technology. Well, I mean, it is a good question. Just to recap on all of that. For a start, Pirelli obviously are in a monopoly. And I say that because Formula One has gone through many eras when we did not have a monopoly. And one of the era in which Michael Schumacher won all his world championships, there were, for one time, there were 3 tyre companies. And then it was basically Michelin against Bridgestone. And Michael and Ross Brawn basically engineered a situation, I guess John Todd was involved, where Bridgestone effectively ran exclusively with Ferrari and everybody else was on Michelin. There were a couple of other teams down the back on Bridgestone, but they weren't in the game. And Bridgestone not only were exclusive to Ferrari, but started to get a lot of data from Ferrari around which they designed and developed their tyres, and vice versa. And so there was a massive interplay of information about the tyre, and that's one of the reasons Michael was so successful in that period, basically running exclusively on Bridgestones on tyres built for the Ferrari. It was just an amazing achievement for Michael to have pulled that off, that whole political thing, and for Ross and for Jean to have pulled that off. And then, of course, Michelin were rudely kicked out of the sport. Interestingly enough, by Ross and Ferrari holding a press conference at Monza accusing Michelin of cheating, after which a year later they pulled out. And then they were hung out to dry in the meantime but just before that at Indianapolis as well, when they could easily have put in a chicane and didn't, and they just let all the Michelin runners look stupid. And they had to come in after one lap. And so Michelin said no more. Then Bridgestone decided that just racing as a monopoly supplier was only going to go so far given the costs of developing Formula One tyres. And suddenly Formula One was left with no tyre supplier. And there was a moment when it looked as if, and this was the threat Bernie Ecclestone put over the teams, that if you guys don't accept my proposal that we do a deal with Pirelli, and most of the teams were a bit reluctant because Pirelli's record in Formula One wasn't great at that point, I will buy Avon tyres and sell them to you, and I'll choose who gets the good tyres and who doesn't. Basically, that was in brackets or italics, and so they all said, okay, we'll go with Pirelli. And then Pirelli came in, but Pirelli came in unlike any other tyre manufacturer in the history of the sport, because they came in with an incredible plan on how to maximize their involvement in Formula One, with marketing, with advertising, with trackside advertising, with hospitality, all the great things that Pirelli do so well. And Bernie wanted to capitalize on that. And he basically, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I mean, basically, if there was a budget of 1 billion, let's say, as a round number, he would have wanted $750 million spent on the marketing and only $250 million spent on the technology. Because why did they need to spend money on technology if they're the monopoly supplier? We'd already lost Bridgestone. Let's keep Pirelli in and let's keep them very happy with all their, peripheral activities. And that made a lot of sense. And Formula One has benefited enormously, I think, from Pirelli's PR over the years. The teams, the drivers, everybody's involved has benefited from the way Pirelli have gone about their Formula One racing. And to their credit, they've actually done a very good job technically over the last decade, I think, because more and more, the tyres are safe, which is very important when the cars are getting quicker and quicker. It's quite difficult to do that. The testing is very limited now, and they've done a very good job with that. And then on top of that, Formula One said to Pirelli, in order to make the technical job as easy as possible, let's not try to build a tyre that'll do a Grand Prix distance. Let's divide the race up. Pit stops are good for Formula One anyway. Build a tyre that'll do third distance or 2/3 distance, and we'll start bringing strategy. You can have different compounds, and that's where we are today. And Pirelli loved that because it meant less technical expertise would be required in order to build these tyres. And we've refined this process over the years in terms of the number of tyres that are brought to the circuit, the allocations the teams have, etc., etc. And Formula One, I think, does quite a good job of telling the public that the reason Pirelli don't build a tyre to last a Grand Prix distance is that we want to break the race up with lots of pit stops. Aren't they exciting? 3-second pit stops, 2-second pit stops. And that's where we are. I think if you said to, if the regulations changed and they said you can now run a tyre for the full Grand Prix distance, I think, I mean, for sure Pirelli would, I mean, the whole tender they bought is not based around that rule anyway, so it wouldn't apply whilst they've got the tender that they have. But or the franchise they have, whatever you want to call it. But for the next one, if the FAA said that, from now on, whoever gets the tyre contract must be able to build tyres that last the full Grand Prix distance. It's good for technology, good for the public, or whatever they want to say. I don't think Pirelli would actually submit a tender for that, because it's too complicated and too difficult to do that. So many factors come into play. All the cars are different for a start. So I don't think that would happen. And I think most people would agree, in final point, I mean, most people would agree that pit stops are quite spectacular and dramatic. And if we remove those, there's a risk that the races would become more tedious. That's not my opinion, but that's what I think most people believe. And I think most Formula One and the people in the pit lane believe that. Another question from Jez. And which would you say is more important to an F1 team, Constructors or Drivers' Championship? Red Bull could be currently drivers given Max's last 3 teammates. He rarely been able to score points last 2 years. And they may build the team around Max, given Max have a say whom he doesn't want his teammate to be. Gordon Murray once said he would not allow his drivers to hide information from each other. Oh, well, everybody says that. Engineers always say, no, we don't want any information being held by one driver. It's nothing. Gordon was just repeating what everybody else has always said. The teams I think the teams would say constructors and drivers are just as important, just as equal. They'd give you a really boring answer. And I think if it's a team that's only won the constructors but not the drivers, they would say, the constructors' championship's much more important, and vice versa. No surprise there. So you don't ask these people. I think from the general public point of view, the drivers' world championship is much more significant and much more tangible than the constructors' world championship. It looks as if mathematically McLaren could even could clinch the constructors' championship in Singapore this weekend. Yeah, and yeah, I don't see a lot of people jumping up and down and getting super excited about it. But the drivers' championship is always something that people remember and talk about. So, who was world champion in 1986? Alan Prost. Who won the constructors' championship? Williams. But it's the Prost winning in 86 was a significant thing, wasn't it? Aaron Lee. Hi, Peter. Is the skill of the mechanics in the garage a big differentiator between teams in terms of on-track performance or performance over the weekend? Was this more important in the past? Well, the skill of the mechanics is obviously important. It's a cliche for me to say that. And I think the current reliability of the teams is a massive credit to the boys and girls in the garages who work around those hot, difficult, complicated cars. Having said that, we now have a system in which very precisely limits the number of hours mechanics can work in the garage. And we also have systems of operation around the car which make it very clear how you solve and get to a particular problem. Do this, do that. It's like a diagnostic thing. Whereas in the old days, there were no limits on the hours you could work. And you often had to get under a car with a torch to see where that pesky leak was coming from. Oh, no, it's from the fuel tank. We're going to have to take everything out and get to the fuel tank under the seat. And those things, it's not like that anymore. It's everything. I'm not saying it's very easy to change a fuel tank. Obviously, it's not. But there are a lot of components on the car now that make it somewhat more simplistic. I'm not saying easy, but simplistic. It's actually quite complicated now to do an engine change. I mean, you could change a Cosworth DFE engine in just over an hour towards the end of the era. Today, to do an engine change is a big deal. 3 or 4 hours, I think. And so but it's all systematic. Everybody knows what the next step is, and usually there are no glitches either, are there? So I think the role of the mechanic has changed a little bit. In the old days, if that's the right phraseology, the mechanics had to just love being racing mechanics, work basically for nothing, and work all-nighters if they had to, and not complain about it, and still be there Monday morning or Tuesday morning back at the factory stripping the cars down. Whereas today, the pay's probably a bit better, and you've got to be super fit for the pit stops. And so it's a different type of mechanic now. You don't see a lot of old mechanics in the garage, by which I mean over 35. Most of them are young guys. Whereas in the 70s, below that, the 60s, 70s, 80s, be a lot of mechanics there that have been around for 20 or so years, and were still going strong. And so that's changed. It's more of an athletic sport now, athletic activity, not sport. Well, it is a sport in a way, athletic activity now than it ever was. And I think the mechanics also, because they're so integrated in what's going on with the car, they're all listening on the radio, they get a feel for strategy, they're trying to anticipate what's going to happen next, they're listening to the driver's comments, trying to think about what they might need to do when he comes back into the garage. All that's very professional and very logical. But believe me, I was team manager at Williams and in early 90s, and I could not persuade Frank or Patrick to let any of the mechanics have a headset. The philosophy of Frank and Patrick was mechanics stand quietly in the garage while the car is out, and when the car comes in, the engineer talks to the driver, and then the engineer tells the mechanics what to do. Very different now. And I think it's much better, to be honest. It's a system that I would have loved to have had. And we had the radios to do it. RMTC were very good with Ken Rumbold, very good radios we had. I think the best radios in the pit lane. But no, they never wanted the mechanics to know what was going on. For some reason, I don't know. I've never really understood it. And so all that's different. And the mechanics had no access to television screens in those days. They had no idea if the car was quick or slow. They could look at the pit board, what was going on with the pit board, but sometimes that didn't give away all the information they needed. So the mechanics now are much more knowledgeable, I would say, because they have so much information coming in. And we have these, obviously we have limits to the time on which they can work, and they can exceed that a few times a year within the limits of the regulations. But that's a very good thing as well. It's very good when you've got so many races and there's so much travel involved, which is incredibly tiring and debilitating. It's very important that we do have those curfew rules in Formula One, and I think they're great. Hey Peter, is it common for drivers not to use the drink system in the car? Max has said that he doesn't drink water during the race to maintain the weight distribution of the car. Did he say that? Well, maintain his weight distribution, I don't know. My experience with drinks, is probably a bit old now, is that they're more trouble than they're worth. They never seem to work, and half the time when they work, it's just boiling hot water coming into the driver's mouth, which he doesn't want anyway. Although it's much better for you in terms of body chemistry. Did you know this? To drink room temperature water than cold water, he says, grabbing his ambient temperature water bottle. And there's a long medical reason for that, because your enzymes are using up more in one direction if it's cold water. So I remember that. Anyway, getting back to it, it's another thing to go wrong. I suppose that's another racingism. The fewer things, electric visors or drink systems or cooling systems in the cockpit for the driver, all things to go wrong. Drinks, I would have thought today, I'm not really up to speed with where they are in 2025. I imagine most of the drink systems work quite well. And I cannot imagine, depends how much water you've got in a bottle or whatever in the cockpit, I suppose, but I cannot imagine that it would have an impact on weight distribution. I ought to ring an engineer, talk to an engineer about that. Really? Pretty marginal on where they can do, what they can do with weight distribution, if that's the case. Finton Mains, hi Peter, would you agree that neither Oscar nor Lando are top 4 drivers? Isn't the World Driver Championship overhyped? It should be about enjoying each Grand Prix. The clue is in the name. Mains. Yeah. Grand Prize. I think it's interesting, isn't it? Now everybody's talking about how important is the World Drivers' Championship because everybody's resigning themselves to either Oscar or Lando being world champion. And I think there's obviously a bit of a tenor of these guys aren't real world champions when the fastest guys out there, Charles and Max, not necessarily in that order, are not world champion. And as for a while, it's a long time since we've had this sort of discussion, and it's only just dawning on me why these questions are coming in. It's because people don't think that Lando or Oscar are right up there. I would say, well, let's talk about the top four then. I'd say Max, Charles, George. Then you got a space for one. Would you put Oscar or Lando in that fourth? I think you would. Not quite sure which one. Bit difficult if you want to make it four. Can we make it five? Is the World Drivers' Championship? It's not overhyped. The problem is it's being won this year by the team that won the Constructors' Championship, because the team that won the Constructors' Championship so well and by such a big margin have got such a good car that, you know, either of those two guys are going to win it. And there's no chance for the faster, the better drivers on the planet. And that's the way Formula One is. The cars are different. Every team is required to design and build its own car, with the exception of Haas, obviously, who have Dallara and I guess Toyota coming up building the car. Every team is, in theory, required to design and build its own car, even to enter the World Championship, let alone actually to start the race. And so we have these differentiations. We have a Ferrari that's not very good in some areas. We have Red Bulls that are not very good for half a year. And yet we have a McLaren that they've done an incredibly, exceptionally good job with, that's very consistent at every circuit throughout the year, Baku aside. So that's what's happening. You know, because the car is always 60% of the overall package that wins a race, 60% car, 40% driver, generally speaking. That was the Enzo Ferrari ratio. And I think he was right, and I think it still stands today. But the driver, of course, a Max, is quite capable of improving a car and taking a bad car and making it the 60-40 ratio that it needs to be. But, or a Charles or some other, Max particularly. But McLaren have just got this great car. Two drivers quick enough to win with it, generally speaking. So there we are. Maybe it comes back to the whole Dennis Jenkinson thing of we shouldn't have a championship and just go by race, and it's all the other sports tend to do that. I mean, we don't have a world championship we do, but they're not very good, of tennis or golf or football or cricket. I mean, they're all nonsense, aren't they? They try to have a world test cricket championship, but I mean, is it as big as the Ashes? No, of course it's not. And we try to have a world tennis championship. Is it as big as Wimbledon or the US Open? No, of course it's not. But Formula One works because it has a championship, and it has this global championship. Each race equally counts for this championship. Begins at the beginning of the year, ends at the end of the year, every year, and it goes around the world. So we have this unique package. We can't do anything about it. It's now there in place, and so we just have to accept it, really. But rather than talking about sprint races and reverse grids and all that stuff, should we be talking about some sort of performance handicap? No, I was thinking, no, don't go down that road, Peter. It's absolutely ridiculous. I can't stand it. When you're talking to one of my mates in GT racing or whatever he's in on BTCC, I had you go and he said, oh, it's really quick. You know, I had the performance handicaps. I couldn't do much with the car. You know, I'm thinking, what is that all about? You know, if the guy's good enough and quick enough to win by a lap, let him win by a lap. That's my view. It's motor racing. Anyway, yeah, so I won't go down that path. But there's nothing we can do. You know, next year, the Aston Martin Honda might be the best car. Has a chance of being the best car. The Adrian Newey car, Fernando Alonso at the wheel, Honda engines, with Andy Cowell managing the whole power unit thing, Adrian Newey running the car. I mean, all the ingredients are there for this to be the best car in Formula One next year, for Aston Martin to do in 2026 what McLaren had done in 25. And then would everybody say, oh, is the Drivers' Championship that important? I think everyone would sit back and say, wow, isn't it great to have a change? And look, Fernando Alonso is going to win another World Championship. Wouldn't everybody celebrate that? It's just because, I don't know, maybe everybody thinks McLaren's boring and the two drivers are boring or something. I don't know. I can't answer that because when I see McLaren, I always tend to think of the whole history of the company and everything they've done. I think about Zach Brown and what he's done and where he's come from and where he is today and the job he's done. And I think about the two drivers. They've both got their stories to tell in terms of heartbreak, not getting an opportunity when they thought they have it, maximizing the big points when they came, and getting out there and doing the job. Everybody has a story to tell. And whoever wins the World Championship this year at McLaren, if it is a McLaren driver, chances are it will be, it's got to be coming on the heading of being a deserved champion because, you got to work hard at these things. Alex G, hello from Germany. Not a question, only happy to see Mick Schumacher finally change his mind and makes an IndyCar test. Yeah, I mean, Mick, I think, has always kind of wanted to be in Formula One more than he was. And I don't think he had a fair crack at Haas at the time, the way it was managed. If he was at the Haas that we have now, I think he'd be doing a much, much better job. Or the team would be doing a better job, as it is. But I think they would be getting a lot more from Mick as well. But it was hopeless where there was. He should never have gone there, in my opinion. He should have kept his powder dry and waited for a better option down the road. But he was so desperate to get into Formula One, he took the Haas thing, and that was wrong, in my opinion. But didn't help him. But I think going to Alpine WEC and talking to the different sort of social milieu of people has opened his mind to IndyCar. And yeah, I hope he goes well. Key to IndyCar being with a good team, really, isn't it? So, I'm sure Mick has got enough feel to know what to do and where to go. Finton Mains, Peter, when did people in Formula One start saying for sure in every second sentence? I associate it with Alan Jones. Well, it's interesting you say that because I used to say it a lot in the 70s and 80s. And my background is Australia. And now you're saying Alan Jones said it a lot. I can only assume it was something we said a lot in Australia. Yeah, for sure, mate. Yeah, beauty. Yeah, for sure he's going to be quick. Oh, for sure. For sure it's going to be Max. And to the point where a lot of my friends used to constantly, laugh at me for saying for sure too much. And I'm not sure it's a thing today. Do people say it today? I don't know. I think I'll start saying I quite like it, for sure. Oh, yeah, for sure. Do you like your new Skoda Rally too? Yeah, for sure. It's better than one of those thumbs up things, actually, on WhatsApp. Just put for sure. They should have one that goes with for sure. For sure, mate, yeah. Oscar, you going to be good at Singapore? Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Good. AL, what are your thoughts on people saying that because Max is a 4-time champion, he should have won in Nürburgring anyway, and what he did during the weekend wasn't anything special? Well, my thoughts are that he didn't go there to beat lots of drivers that we haven't heard of who were out there having fun. He went there to drive around the Nürburgring long circuit, all 15 miles of it. And that's, I say 15 miles because that's what it was. I don't know whether it is today. I guess it is, probably. They've changed it towards the end of the lap, I think. And so that's why he went there. And why not do that? I mean, these days you can't go there and do a lap because there are so many cars going round, thankfully all in the right direction these days, that you just constantly got traffic. And there are sections of road where you're not allowed to overtake and all this stuff. And it's actually quite dangerous because there are loonies out there going far too quickly, hurting themselves. And so Max, because he wants to drive the Nürburgring, the greatest circuit on the planet, thought, well, the way to do this is to do it properly. Safer way to do it is to go racing and drive a reasonably quick car around there, like a Ferrari, and have some fun. That's why he did it. He didn't go there to beat all the other drivers, although, of course, he did, and he won easily, which is what he would do because he's so good. He went there to drive the Nürburgring. So 100% full credit to Max for wanting to do that. No other reason. If he went there to, if it was the old circuit, the current Grand Prix circuit at the Nürburgring, I don't think he would have done it. What's the point? He would go there because he wanted to do that circuit. Now, he might want to do some more long-distance racing, and that's fine. That's a different project. Got a lot of banging going on outside. I'm quite sure what's going on. But there is a storm warning, yellow storm warning here in Spain today. They don't tell you when, on what form the storm's going to take, rain or wind or whatever. There's quite a lot of banging going on outside. Anyway, it seems to have stopped now. So that's why he did it. And if he decides then to do something else, it'll be for a different reason. He wants to try endurance racing. He loves the idea of doing Le Mans and build up to that or whatever it is. But this one, he wanted to just do the Nürburgring. Give him a break. Adam, how do you personally define GOAT, Peter? To me, Hamilton is the most successful driver ever, but that doesn't make him the greatest. What criteria do you use for being the greatest? Well, I often defer to my friend Corey Pesatora, who does a lot of great stats, and I put a lot of them out on my channel, 99% of which prove that Jim Clark was the greatest racing driver of all time, because Corey's stats take into account the unreliability of cars, for example, in the 60s, 50s and 60s, and compare Clark with Verstappen on a very equal footing, and Fangio and Ascari and others, and Senna, obviously. And so, you know, look at the videos I've done on the channel already with Corey about that. And he's doing more as well. As we speak, he's constantly updating them. So, greatest of all time, I think you have to, first of all, you have to remember that racing was much more dangerous in the old days. There were far fewer races in one season in the old days. The point system was completely different in the old days. And so comparing race wins, points scored, championships won is irrelevant. You've got to look at laps led, what you've done in a car against the opposition, how many races you've won, championship, non-championship, all of that, and bring that in. And then show me a driver who's better than Jim Clark. Mouse down. Good chance we'll see Max v Valentino Rossi in an endurance race next year. Really? Okay. I know who'll win that one, and it won't be Valentino. Adam, coming back to Adam. You've said Jim Clark is the greatest, but also that Max is driving as well as anyone in history. Is your logic that Max might be capable of what Clark did, but he proved it, so Jim stays your GOAT? Well, my logic is that with all the tools that Max has with which to play, he's doing as good a job as any driver in history has done with the tools they've had to play with. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that compare Max now with Jim Clark. I'm saying that if you put Jim Clark in Max's situation now, he would probably do the same job as Max. Or Max in Jim Clark's situation, he'd probably do the same job as Max. That's what I'm saying. You've got to have that picture in your mind of all these different eras. And, you know, these days you can talk about a rookie scoring points in his first Grand Prix. He finished 9th. Well, you know, I can think of plenty of rookies in the 60s that finished 4th in the first Grand Prix and actually did score serious points. And Clay Regazzoni and Ignacio Giunti, to name but two. So, yeah, you've got to respect the context of which you're driving. I mean, as I've said many times, Max has never raced, to my knowledge, he's never raced a single-seater with an H-pattern gearbox in which he's had to heel and toe and he's got a foot clutch. Never. So we don't know how Max's hand-foot coordination compares with that of, say, Ayrton Senna. How would we ever know that? Also, one of Stirling Moss's greatest attributes was his ability to pass slower cars at exactly the right moment. James Hunt's too. Exactly the right moment to give him an advantage coming out of a corner and to hold up the guy behind him at just the right moment without doing any sort of blocking, without doing anything dangerous. He was just perfect at timing the pass of the slower back marker. That's no longer an art in Formula One either. So, yeah, but equally, you know, today the cars are much quicker. They're much more technologically advanced. You've got to be half jet pilot, half Formula One driver. A lot more racing. Got to be much fitter, probably. So many factors are different. You can't compare one with the other. All I can say is that within his realm, Max is up there with the greatest of other drivers from their realms. So greatest of all time, what does that mean? The greatest of all time doesn't necessarily, in my mind, mean regardless of all these factors, this guy was the best driver. It means the greatest of all time taking into account all those factors. It's a bit of a fudge, I know, but you've got to do that in motor racing. You don't necessarily have to do that with tennis. I know the racket technology's changed. golf. I know the golf club and ball technology's changed, the courses have changed, but it's easier to start defining greatest of all time. You can still relate Jack Nicklaus to Tiger Woods. Oh, this is the storm coming. Mega. Lots of thunder going on. But with Max, it's very difficult to do that. Adam, another question. If Fernando, you got a lot of questions here, Adam. Nothing wrong with that, but give others a chance sometimes. If Fernando Alonso had swapped seats with Lewis Hamilton in 2017, how many titles do you think Alonso would have right now? Well, I think Fernando could have won at least 3 more championships had he handled his career a bit differently. Had he done a more harmonious job at Ferrari, I think he could have won a title at Ferrari. Had he not immediately thrown his toys out of the pram at McLaren after 1 year, I think he could have won a championship at McLaren. And then he might well have got a Mercedes drive and then been in the Merc. A lot of these things you bring upon yourself. I'm one of the world's greatest Fernando fans. I love watching the way he drives. I love his peculiarity of spiky turn in, middle to short to long, but then incredible hand and footwork from that moment onwards to get the car beautifully flat and beautifully square to everything he's doing. Just a joy to watch. But, Felipe Massa's a sweet guy. You've got to do a lot to upset Felipe Massa, and Fernando managed to do that. Lewis Hamilton was a rookie at McLaren in 2007, and Fernando went there. The first time Lewis went a bit quicker and started to cramp Fernando's style. Never happened to Fernando before. He talked about the brakes, this and that, and it all ended up in the whole $100 million fine thing. And so if Fernando just stayed quiet and just driven the race car, I think he could have won at least 3 more world championships by now. But you could say, well, that is Fernando. That is his characteristic. That is his way, nature. And if you take those things away, he wouldn't be the racing driver he is. I'm not sure that's right. I think technically he's very, very good. And I'd like to make another point, actually. It almost comes back to, well, it does come back to the Ryder Cup. I've often thought that the whole business of getting the crowd behind you, whipping up the crowd, is a complete and utter waste of time and actually not very good for the sport. As we saw in the Ryder Cup, a lot of abuse being hurled at people like Rory McIlroy, which is completely uncalled for. Just as booing is uncalled for at the end of a Grand Prix. And it just goes to show, you couldn't have had more American fan energy behind the US team on the first 2 days of the Ryder Cup, and yet they managed to blow it completely. It did absolutely nothing for them. And not many people will say that. They still think this cliche thing, because the TV companies, the newspapers, all of them love that the fans go crazy. They think it's great for selling their product, the TV station and the newspaper. I think it's really a waste of time. Nigel used to say, oh yeah, it's worth half a second a lap round Silverstone or a second a lap. And it kind of was, but I think Nigel would have won 87 Silverstone with empty grandstands. And I think the US team on Sunday in the singles would still have played the matches they played if the grandstands were half full anyway, weren't they? So it's all over the top. And I think it's a little bit, I'm getting around to saying it's a little bit like that with Fernando. There's a lot of emotional stuff going on with Fernando. And if he was just quiet and straightforward and just got on with the job, I think he'd be exactly the same race driver and he would win more championships. And all this stuff about, being fired up and emotional and go for it. And I think the Ryder Cup has put the complete lie to that. And we need to stop it. Yep. Adam. Do Max's wins outside Formula One show he's building a legacy closer to Clark or Andretti than Hamilton or Schumacher? Yeah, kind of. I mean, to me, it was just Max being Max. It's just a simple, logical thing for somebody that loves racing and driving to do some racing which involved going to the long circuit of the Nürburgring. Let's not make more of it than that. I mean, there's no doubt Max loves racing and driving, and I suppose that makes him quite unusual in modern Formula One, where it's quite cool between Grand Prix to be going to fashion shows or movie premieres or TikTok yourself riding a bike in the mountains or doing all this stuff that's out there. and rather than the boring business of just loving racing and driving, which is Max. And I suppose in that sense, he's breaking the mold, but it's going to be difficult for him to do a lot more than he is because there's too many Grand Prix. And when Jim Clark was racing and doing British Touring Car Championship, French Formula 2 Championship, racing in America sports cars, racing in America Indianapolis, he was doing 10 Grand Prix a year and a few test sessions. Mario had his American program and then kind of fitted Formula 1 around it until eventually he focused on the championship in 78 and won it. And then he did a few more years after that. But I don't think you're going to see Max doing a massive amount more, but he'll like to do challenges. I would imagine Max would love to do Pikes Peak, I would guess. He probably wants to do Le Mans because it's Le Mans and it's a 24-hour challenge. And he probably like, wow, I can be in the car for all that time, or 23 hours or whatever. I can drive the car. Whether he'd then want to do rallying or IndyCar, I think he'd probably think, a bit too dodgy at the moment. I'll wait till I've done a bit more in Formula 1. And I think he'll draw the line there. But I think he'll do these one-off things that are just curious to him. And it's curiosity that is the hallmark of a great racing driver, in my opinion. They want to know what this car would be like to drive, what that circuit would be like to drive. Jim Clark was driven by curiosity, trying different cars all the time, whether it be the Felde four-wheel drive 2-litre sports car at Brands Hatch, whether it be the Honourable Patrick Lindsay's old Maserati, I think, or it might have been Alpha, around Rouen between practice sessions in 64, whether it be, Tony Brooks driving the pre-war Mercs at Alton Park just to see what they were like. There's so many examples of that. Drivers are curious, and I think it's a shame that so many teams put the lid on that and don't allow their drivers to do more. I mean, if Lando Norris wants to go and do a couple of rallies, and he loves rallying, I know that, let him do it, for Pete's sake. He might make him a better Grand Prix driver, actually, because he's a bit, he'll get on with it and just enjoy his driving and relax a bit. And if, I think the teams are far too over the top now in the way they run their drivers and control their drivers. And I'm glad Max is doing that. If anything, that's where he's breaking the mold. He's showing that if you work with a team that's organized and logical, you can do this stuff without any problem at all. Pridit, hi Peter, you said that since Max went well in Baku, Singapore should be good for him too. Do you not anticipate the thermal degradation will cause a problem for him there or other tracks that are hard on tyres? Well, I think thermal degradation is always a problem in Singapore for the tyres and the brakes for that matter. And I think everyone will be in trouble with brakes at Singapore. But I don't think Red Bull will be disproportionately in trouble with their tyre deg or their brakes. I think they'll have the same problems that come with being in Singapore. But tyre deg is just a function of downforce, which is a function of balance and grip. Sorry, balance and grip come when you've got downforce, lots of efficient downforce, which Red Bull kind of have now. I mean, we shouldn't say they've got it in the same way McLaren have got it. I don't think they're where McLaren are. But they've got enough downforce now to be able to set the car up with a decent balance, know that it's going to be quite consistent, and therefore have much better tyre deg. It's not that Red Bull is hard on tyres. It's when the car has no grip, they're always on the edge of understeer or oversteer, and that's when the tyre deg goes. So I think their tyre deg will be relatively better compared with an RB21 they might have brought to Singapore in April. I think they'll have much less tyre issues now as a result of having more downforce. And I think people see tyre deg as a separate thing. It's not. It's purely related to grip and balance. And Red Bull have kind of got that now. I keep saying kind of because nothing is ever a given. And as I keep saying, I don't think the Red Bull is in the same window as McLaren right now, but it's not far away, which is a huge step forward from where they were 3 months ago. So but yeah, of course they're going to have problems with the heat, and they're going to have problems with tyres and brakes like everybody else, and they're going to have to run bigger brake ducts and all that stuff. But, that's just setting a car up for a circuit, as you do at any different circuit. Pridit, in Monza, his right front was blistering. Then he lost time to both McLarens from lap 27 until he stopped 10 laps later. It seemed Red Bull may still suffer a lot with the tyre deg, despite the recent step forward. Right front blistering from lap 27. Yeah, but is a blister a big issue? I don't think it is. I think graining is an issue these days. I was talking about how good a job Pirelli do. I don't recall this year or even last couple of years, blistering itself being a major issue. And to me, he won Monza, given the fact that it was his first race with that floor and that they may not have got the absolutely perfect setup. Unbelievably good, wasn't he? Very good. And he won the race. Whatever Max was doing in terms of gap to the McLarens, you've also got to factor in fuel consumption, lift and coast, all the other stuff that comes into play, harnessing the power. To me, maybe I think their time management will be as good as McLaren's, partly because Max will be slightly better at it than Oscar or Lando, and partly because they're pretty near them anyway. And I don't see it being an issue. Adam, is it fair to other GT3 drivers that Verstappen enters, or is it like getting a Premier League striker play Sunday League? Well, I can't answer the soccer things, I don't know anything about it, but I kind of understand what you're trying to say, I think, from that. But of course it's fair. I mean, I have to say, though, I mean, it's weird, isn't it? When you've got regular competitors in a championship, they all kind of resent some star coming in for one race and blowing them away. I remember going to a kart meeting in Kerpen in Germany one year when Michael did the race, and he'd already won, I don't know, 3 or 4 championships by then. He was very good. And, well, he always was very good, but he was Michael Schumacher. And I went there just to see what he looked like in a kart. I wanted to see how he drove the kart and how he sat in the kart and his body language. I wanted to see all that. And I was just fascinated to see it. And I was absolutely astonished that all the regular kart racers weren't around Michael all the time, asking him questions and looking at the way he was doing things. And they were all sort of leaving him on his own, and they were all doing their own thing. And it was really that, they didn't really want him there because he was coming in as an outsider and interfering with their race, which I think was a championship decider or something. I think Lutzi was there from memory. And I just thought, how bizarre is that? You've got potentially the greatest driver in the world at that time racing a kart next to you, and you're not actually happy to see it. And the same with Max. I would assume in the paddock they would all have been around Max. What do you think about this? What's your advice for that? How do you turn in? Well, how are you using the pedals? What do you think of this? You'd imagine it would be like that, but I don't think it was. I think they all probably went away to do their professional thing in their garages, and Max went out and blew them all away, keeping it very simple, not saying very much. And there's probably very little learning from what Max was doing at the Nürburgring, which is, I'd like to say, well, that's human nature, but I'm not sure it is. I think it's just human racing nature, motor racing nature, and it's kind of sick, to be honest. My channel SG says, hello from Singapore. Hey there, hope you're getting ready for the big weekend. Looking forward to that very much. Rayo, what was the atmosphere like in the Williams factory at Didcot compared to the Grove location? Oh, much better. Actually, I have to confess, I never even worked at Grove. I remember Frank arriving at the factory one day and saying, I've just been driving past this. The route I take to work now, I go past this old chemical factory on the left. It could be a good site for our new factory. We've got to get away from this place. And at the time, that was a bit small, I guess, for where Formula One was going. And the BMW Le Mans program was coming on, and we'd done the rally, the Rover RB6 thing, and there were lots of other things going on, and the IndyCar for that matter, the Longhorn racing thing. And so expansion was not a bad thing. And we also had these huge cooling towers next to the factory, which was coal to electricity, which were going to be knocked down at some point, but there was some sort of environmental thing going on. And there was also kind of a weird aroma from a nearby sewage plant some mornings, which Frank never liked. But I loved Didcot because it was just the right size. We produced and built the FW14B there, and C and A, and it was as good a race car as any Grand Prix team would ever build. The rules were much looser then in terms of what you could do technically. And it was just a great, great racing car produced in that factory where, I don't know, we had maybe 200 people, I guess, 250 max. And everybody knew one another, and you'd get there early and you go down to the shop floor and chat to all the boys in the race shop, and then you go into the factory shop and talk to all the machinists and fabbies, and then you go to the prototype shop, and then you go and see old Derek Page, not old, Derek Delboy, in the kitting area with the stickers and all the assembly bits for the radiators, and then you know, there were all the office sections, Honda engine dynos out the back, which Renault were using a bit, I think, at that point. Well, maybe they weren't. I don't know what happened to that dyno area. And then the wind tunnel at the far end. So it was a great factory. Loved it. And all the offices were at the top. Frank's. Mine actually was at the bottom on the corner. Really good office. I could see all the coming and going of the trucks and when everyone was arriving and not arriving. It was good. Yeah. I'll never forget Patrick one year. It was when we were with Honda. And we used to have reception used to be in the middle of the building at the front. And there'd be Jackie or whoever would be on the left there, and you go in and sign your name if you're a visitor. And when we did the deal with Honda, Honda wanted more space. They wanted an office, and they wanted dyno area at the back of the factory, which we did. But to give them more office space, we basically made the reception area much, much smaller. And they started operating from an office behind the reception area. That became the Honda office, where there were at any given moment 2 or 3 Honda people, changing every 6 months or so, as Honda loved to do, training all their young guys and girls. And they were there. And it was the days of fax machines. And for whatever reason, I wasn't involved in any of that stuff, obviously. But I remember Patrick was one night, it was about 6 o'clock at night, and you could always hear Patrick walking down the corridor, the shiny lino floored corridor. Walking, he used to walk down to Frank's office at the far end. He also had a corner office above mine, big one, with a mug of tea in his hand. He'd have a good natter with Frank every night about this and that. And I heard the footsteps of Patrick about this time, the predicted footsteps. Clump, clump, clump. I suddenly heard Patrick shouting at the top of his voice, Frank, Honda have been reading all our faxes. Turns out, excuse me, I bashed the mic, had the drink, coughing. Turns out that in giving Honda that office space, we'd basically just given them the number of the fax machine that was in there anyway. So people were still sending all the private and confidential Williams faxes there, and Honda were using it as well, reading all the Williams faxes and passing them on. Patrick went absolutely ballistic. So funny. Partly because of the stuff that was in the Williams faxes about Honda, I think. Anyway, they were the days, definitely were the days. Quinton Hirschfeld. Hello, Mr. Windsor. I've always wanted your opinion on Frenson's problem at Williams. He was as fast as a rocket and destroyed every single one of his teammates in all the other teams he drove for. Yeah, he was good, wasn't he? He's a good bloke. My mate Chris Starring got on very well with him. Chris was he was in the marketing department at the time, good Aussie mate of mine. I think he manages Sebastian Montoya now, or was anyway. I think he still is. I hope he is. Or maybe not now, because I think he's with Alonso, isn't he? Anyway, Chris is a very funny guy, Australian. And for some reason, he and Frenson really hit it off and became really good mates. And I remember one day, I used to play, what did I do with Chris? Squash, tennis, I don't know, something like that. And we were chatting in the locker room. He said, oh, yeah, it was great. I said, Heinz, well, he used to call him H, that's right. H came into the office today, and he was carrying that stupid briefcase he always has with him. So I said, H, what is in that briefcase? Come on, let's have a look at it. And he said, no, Chris. No, sorry, Chris, no, look. So Chris grabs the briefcase, opens it up on the top of the reception area, and inside, predictably, there's some ridiculous book, some sort of Sony Walkman, and nothing else of importance at all, but it's the impression of lots of papers and stuff. Chris said, what a load of old rubbish, H, come on, get rid of it. And anyway, from as I wasn't actually around, I wasn't working for the team then, that's why I'm saying that way, but the impression I got was that basically, I think the management, I better not be too specific here, I think the management thought he was a bit of a wimp and a bit wet, didn't say that much, and just, I don't think they ever got behind him in the way they got behind even Jacques, let alone Damon or even Nigel or AJ or even, any other driver. I think they just were a bit bemused by Heinz Harald and never really understood him. I think that's be the right way. I don't think the Williams management were the most brilliant at people management, of understanding and making allowances for different characters. That's an understatement of the year. So I think it was that. You know, I think you had to get to know Harald. I think he's quite shy, Heinz Harald, and I didn't really know him either, to be honest. But then I had no reason to, because I wasn't working there. I just knew him to say hello to. And it was, I don't know. I think it was just those times, wasn't it? When the driver was plugged into the car and you were just expected to go quickly out of the box, and you weren't really listened to very much if once the car was sorted and going well. It's a slight overstatement, but it was a little bit like that. I think from Heinz Harald's perspective, that's probably how he saw Williams. I think he saw Patrick as pretty ferocious, problem to deal with. Me, I thought Patrick was amazing and one of the great engineers of all time, race engineers. Rao, did Walter Wolff and Frank Williams get along after he sold the team in '76? Frank Williams got on with everyone. Frank had no enemies. I mean, of course he got on with Walter Wolff. He still thought he was a lovely guy. And even when Ron Dennis took, in no particular order, Tag, Honda engines, Neil Oatley, Adrian Newey from Frank and ran them, all those components at McLaren, Frank still loved Ron. Still thought he was wonderful. Frank was like that. He didn't have enemies at all. He loved Bernie, he loved Max, he loved everyone. I think he felt that was a good way to do business and a good way to run the company. And I think it also fell into Frank's general philosophy of never really making a difficult decision until it's made for you, and just sort of keeping everything as much on the straight and narrow as you possibly could. And that meant not alienating anyone. Adios 2011. I only laugh because it's 2011, not 2025. Hey, Peter, love your channel. Thank you very much. That's very kind. Thanks, everybody, by the way, for subscribing and watching. It goes without saying that if you like the channel, please refer it to friends. It's how we grow the channel, and that's to everybody's advantage. Mo, wasn't someone trying that somewhere outside of Las Vegas? I think we're talking about building a proper circuit. Well, if they were, they're adopting PW's concept and idea. Absolutely. I said there should be 3 or 4 mega super circuits like the Nürburgring Nordschleife in the Las Vegas desert, and there should be, a Brands Hatch and a Solitude and a Clermont-Ferrand in the middle of the Sahara Desert. Why not? Lots of space. Sir Lecky, absolutely love your content, Peter. Respect. Question: during your Williams days, was there a behind-the-scenes decision that proved crucial to a title but went unnoticed by fans? Well, yeah, there was. Proved crucial to a title or not winning a title. Is that what you mean? Certainly not winning a title. The crucial decision was made at Monaco in '87 to reject Honda's proposal to run Mansell and Nakajima in '88. And in my opinion, although McLaren had a very good car in '88, in my opinion, Nigel would have won that championship in a Honda-powered Williams in '88. But Frank said, no way Nakajima's good enough to be in my team, A, and B, I've got Nigel on a 2-year contract and not Nelson, and it means running Nigel, and I don't think Nigel's as big a championship potential as Nelson Piquet. So I don't want Nigel, even if he's with Nakajima, especially if he's with Nakajima. And so he rejected it, and they went to Judd Engines and lost the championship as a result. So there was one. Let's try and think of one that went towards winning the championship. Crucial decision. Well, I think if Nigel had had anybody but Riccardo Patrese in the other car in 91, 92, I don't think he would have won the championship. I think it would have been a mess. And I think Frank's decision to go with Patrese, which is what Nigel had been pushing for, was critical to winning that 92 World Championship. So, yeah. I think that was a very important decision to make, based on what Nigel wanted for the first time, really. Hristo Pastsev, hi Peter, would you mind sharing with us how you remember Michael Schumacher as a person? What impression did he leave in you? Thank you. He is he was, let me think. I would say he's a very kind person and a very caring person who, and that's easy, those platitudes these days to use words like that. But I'm only saying that because there is an image of Michael being very austere and very dictatorial and not having much heart or soul. For me, Michael was very different. And you saw that in the way he worked with the mechanics. He understood their lives, got to know their families, and both Benetton and Ferrari. And even at a level of journalists, he would kind of quickly know what all our foibles were and what we were doing and how we thought, and anticipating the questions and having a bit of a laugh over that and seeing how short he could make the interviews when you wanted to make it a bit longer. He had a very good sense of humor like that. It was kind of difficult to know Michael in the last 4 years of his career, because there was so much stuff around him. For people like me, I wasn't going to start, pushing my way through all the crud to get to Michael. But occasionally I'd bump into him in a gym, at a race, at a hotel somewhere, and we'd have a bit of a chat about working out, food, dietitian stuff that he was interested in. I'd talk to him a bit about the car, obviously, and he'd talk a little bit about that, but not in detail. But on the other side of the coin, very, very, like Max, very, very clear picture in his mind of what he wanted and where he wanted to go with the car, what he needed, what he was able to compromise with on the car through his own driving. And I got that impression through all the engineers, a lot of the engineers with whom he worked. And so, enormous respect for Michael. In the last year at Mercedes, I remember chatting to Sam Bird. He was the third driver at Merck that year at Canada. After qualifying, it was after Friday practice. Michael wanted to go skydiving on Friday. We wanted Sam to go with him skydiving, having just been driving a Formula One car around Montreal all day. That was Michael, wasn't it? It's a little bit like Max wanting to do the long circuit of the Nürburgring, because it's out there to be done. Why not do it? He's a racing driver. That circuit's built for racing drivers. Michael's philosophy, I guess, was skydiving. I'm a race driver. I love taking risks. I love the adrenaline rush. I can do it. And he could do it. And it was the same with his bikes. It wasn't just a slow 250. It was always something quick with Michael. Always. So, I remember another good friend of mine, Tim Wright, who used to be at IMG when Michael was managed by IMG, and he was Michael's guy, International Management Group, Mark McCormack's group, and they did the Nike deal and various other things. And Tim, like me, very into golf and tennis and cricket in Tim's case. I'm into all three as well. But I remember he said he'd just spent the weekend with Michael in his house in Switzerland, and Michael he'd just been sent, I don't know how he got it, but sent a set of, I think it was McGregor clubs, might have been TaylorMade. I think it was TaylorMade clubs. Really nice set of TaylorMade golf clubs. And Michael said, why have I got so many clubs? Surely I just need the one club. What's all these other clubs for? He couldn't work it out at all. I don't think it was his sport, golf. Anyway, great guy. Gino Moan, hi Peter, how you doing? I'm doing really well, thank you very much. I'm just curious about this, When they say storm warning in Spain, you tend to wonder what it is, because we don't have that many storms. I think we've had it now, a few claps of thunder and the odd drop of rain, that's about it. But I'm doing very well, thanks. Seleki, also another one. Any advice for a young Indian child who hopes to become an F1 driver one day? Is it even possible? It's for my nephew. Well, I know this is a very easy thing to say, but and it's not something that, as far as I know, any of the Formula One driver academies say either. But it's not difficult to establish if you're nephew has got the talent by letting him do a couple of days with Rob Wilson. Rob will tell you if he's got that God-given Kimi Räikkönen thing inside that will enable him to become a Grand Prix driver without you having to spend a lot of money or time on it. Of course, karting, the normal ladder, is there to be climbed, but you can get a pretty good feel from Rob, and he's starting to do quite a lot of kids of karting age, so he can do quite a lot of comparing now as well. So I would suggest you go get a day with Rob Wilson, and if you want to get in touch with Rob and you're in India, do it through who do it through Narain Karthikeyan probably has Rob's number, I would think. I think he's done some days with Rob. Oh, or Corinne Chandok, for sure. I'd give it to you myself, except I feel a bit odd putting it out on live on air. It's probably not appropriate to do that. And there's no other way of... It doesn't have a website or an app or anything like that. Come on, this is Rob Wilson. Sarosh Soman. Hey, Sarosh. Peter, I was watching some onboards of Prost that was released recently by F1. What immediately struck me was that I felt that Antonelli looks very similar in terms of early turn in overall way. Yeah, very similar. They're both quite short corner drivers and very similar. And similar in the sense that Prost wasn't as good as Senna on fast corners either. In the same way, Antonelli's not as good as George on fast corners. So you could say, well, if only Antonelli could drive like George on fast corners, imagine how good he'd be. I say, if only George drove like Antonelli on slow corners, imagine how good he'd be. I don't think George needs to learn much on fast corners, but if George starts to turn in early on slow corners, as Antonelli does, and really shorten his corners and becomes a lot more compact and manipulative of the car, creating a bigger bigger sweet spot in which to operate, no one will see him he'll be up there with Max, in my opinion, if he does that. The moment, he's not doing that. He's still got longer corners on slow corners, but he's very good on fast corners, George. Broderick, big up. Max is the chosen one. How do you do that, Broderick? Get that different font for your name. That's pretty cool. So we got some super chats here. Thank you very much. M.A. Khan. Peter, when I see Max, I think of the greatest of all time, Mr. Clark. Yeah, well, Jimmy... It was not for nothing that I put that picture in of Jim Clark at the Eiffel Rennen in '67, and I'll put it up again because there's Jimmy Clark. He's won 2 world championships by now, and there he is in the snow in a Formula 2 car, leading what it looks like Jackie Ickx in the Tyrrell Matra there at the Nürburgring with snow. Look how cold it is, purely because A, he wants to put on the show, doesn't want to let the fans down, and B, because it's the Sudschleifer. Wow, that's impressive, isn't it? Similar to Max, just wanting to do that stuff, and it's great, and I'm very pleased. It's a cliche, but I'm very pleased he's doing that. Anyway, back to Windsor. Thank you very much for that. Very nice. Let's have a look at some other super chats. This one, M.A. Khan. Jason said he believes Perez was his best teammate at applying power, echoing your view. He thinks Max is so good in this area, maybe due to Perez. Oh, Jensen, talking about Jensen Button, I think. I don't know. Yeah, it could be. Yeah, well, I've always said Perez, to my eye, has always been really, really good in from rotation point to exit. Very, very good at the way he loads up the rear. But I think Jensen Button was very good as well. And Kimi Räikkönen was in his day. And Max has improved because of Perez. I would definitely say that. And that shows another of Max's qualities. Able to dig deep, be self-critical, and learn from people like Perez, which is not what Alonso did when he was alongside Hamilton at McLaren. He didn't want to learn from Lewis. He just assumed if Lewis is better, it must be because the team are favouring him. And that's the difference between Alonso's mentality and Max's mentality. Ghost Driver 87. Thank you very much again for your super chat. Hi, Peter. Hi, Peter. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. Well, I do my best. Huge fan of your work. Question. If you picked a 2-driver team today and you can pick anyone except Max, who would your drivers be and why? Oh, you love these sorts of things, don't you? Anybody except Max, 2-driver team. Well, I just think Charles a fascinating person and nice guy and very quick. So I would enjoy trying to sort of mellow Charles down a bit and get him to not make mistakes like, well, you know, as recently as Miami, and forget Baku, but I mean, Miami went off on the formation lap of the sprint race. And mind you, it was only a sprint race, so aquaplaned off. It wasn't really the same as what he did in Baku in Q3 when it really mattered. So yeah, he's got to stop doing that, and I would enjoy the challenge of honing that. So I'd have Charles in one car, I think, and I'd definitely want a long corner driver in the other. So maybe Carlos Sainz, maybe Lando Norris, both of whom are good guys. I say good guys, people easy to work with. Maybe Pierre Gasly in the other car. No, I think I'd go for Leclerc, Norris probably. But what car are you giving me? That's the big question. Forget the drivers. What car have I got? That's what I want to know. Much more important. What engineers have I got? Have I got Adrian, or have I got Rob Marshall, or what? What have I got? You know, that's the question. We've done this one. Mishrif. I'm not sure I've done this super chat. If I have, apologies. With Max's win at the Nordschleife, do you think other Formula One drivers would dominate the way Max did, given the level of talent they have? I think most of well, that's a good question, actually. If Yuki Tsunoda or Liam Lawson jumped into the Ferrari that Max had driven at Nordschleife, would they have won the race the way Max did? They should, if they're in Formula One. They're in theory the 20 best racing drivers on the planet around a circuit like the Nürburgring. But would they? It's a good question. I don't think they would, actually. And I think, you know, that's to say quite a lot of the talent of the guys that Max was racing against. Because there are some guys out that do that whole series who know their car well, know the Nürburgring well. Difficult to beat those guys. Max made it look easy because he is Max, but short corners, the way he had the car beautifully square. Going into that turn one pass, you could see there that he just had the car absolutely settled perfectly on the tyres, getting to the apex of the corner, the rotation point. Just made it look so easy. But would Liam Lawson have done that? Would Yuki Tsunoda have done that? Would Franco Colapinto have done that? I don't think they would have, actually. It's a good question. Depends how seriously they took it. They probably take it too seriously, I would think, and want to do whole, you know, lots of test sessions or whatever. Max just jumped in. All those people he was with when he was doing his original runs, he's in that Porsche, wasn't he? Just going round and round with lots of general public in front of him. Oh, brake here, past there. Sid, another super chat. I love the whole Nürburgring NLS with Max Lulum winning and Jan's comeback too there since his accident. Also, Jan Mardenborough, yeah, another driver I always rated, actually. He raced a lot of time in Japan, didn't he? It's amazing he hasn't had better offers. Also, the 296 looking so menacing. Your thoughts? Well, I agree with all of them. Absolutely agree with all of them. And Jan coming back. I've always rated Jan Mardenborough. Why hasn't he had the brakes? I know he had that big shunt there, but coming back to do that just shows that he's a steely, good guy. Your thoughts? And it was a terrible shunt as well, as we all know. And the Ferrari, yeah, if I was going to get any Ferrari, buy any, it'd be the 296. Not that I could afford one, but I would love a 296. I think they're great cars, beautiful car. It's always amazing to me when you think of all the other supercars out there. It's a bit like the notes on a piano, the octave on a piano. You think, how can so many tunes have been created from these white and black notes in this scale? And yet they're still creating new stuff all the time. A combination here, there, never ends. A bit like faces. Every face in the world is different. And so it is, and the point I'm making is, you got all these computers and all these stylists, all these great car companies all over the world, and yet Ferrari still managed to come up with something that says Ferrari, as distinct from everybody else who basically is copying one another, and it's quite difficult to distinguish between them. And yet the Ferrari always has something that's a little bit different. It's incredible, isn't it, that how they do that? When you think of the way Jaguar have gone down the road, you know, gone to pot with all their cars, they could be interchanged with Nissans or whatever in the shape they've got, but not with a Ferrari. I think that 296 is a beautiful car. actually, got to say. So thank you very much. Yes, I'll have one. Thank you. Ferrari red. Or yellow, don't mind. Yellow with black wheels, be good. Sue Evans. Hi, Sue. Another super chat. Love your work, Peter. You're my go-to analyst. Thank you very much indeed, Sue. Very kind of you to say that. And I will be doing the usual 3 videos from Singapore. So I'm just scrolling up and down looking for these super chats because I should give them priority, obviously. Mr. Clark, Mr. Jim Clark of Duns, Scotland. He loved it when they asked him, what's your hometown? In 63. I come from Duns in Scotland. Where? Duns, D-U-N-S. Oh, okay. And then it became Tom Carnegie on the PA at Indy. Jim Clark from Duns, Scotland. Nobody had heard of Duns, even in Scotland, I think, let alone the UK. And there it was, suddenly on the world map. Brilliant, Jimmy. Jeffrey B, another super chat. Is there still a place in Formula One for independent engine manufacturers? It seems that the rules are written for the car companies to promote their works brands. I miss Cosworth, Ilmore, Mechachrome. Yeah, don't we all? No, there's no room for them. Now you have to be a massive manufacturer. You have to guarantee to supply X number of teams and put in X amount of money and blah, blah, blah. It's just like trying to get on the grid just to be an engine manufacturer these days. So yeah, no, sadly those days are over. Although interestingly, a lot of the people at Mercedes powertrain and probably Red Bull powertrain have come from Cosworth and Ilmore. Cosworth beget Ilmore, which beget Mercedes powertrain. So, Andy Carl is a classic example of that. So yeah, good question, but no, sadly not. I'm going to press a clear button now, probably to my Aximus Row. If Karun Chandok can do it, then so can your nephew. Yeah, well, he's talking about this sweet Indian nephew who I said, get Rob's number from Karun Chandok. And I actually gave Rob's number to Karun Chandok when he first came over, and he was doing F3000, I think. It might have been F3 days. Karun, you got to go and see this guy, Rob. Really? I won't do the accent. I know you're not allowed to. So he said, oh, really? Okay. Nothing much happened. Then I pushed him again, and he did, and I think he loved it. And now he's a very good friend, Karun. Sarosh Suman, Peter, how was the relationship between Senna and Schumacher? It's been shown as both of them didn't like each other. Your views, please. Well, I think Michael had massive respect for Ayrton and everything that he had done and was doing. But Michael was very clinical in the way he lived his racing life. He was only for Michael Schumacher. He wanted to win. And therefore, in the Jimmy Connors way of the world, you don't go out of your way to be mates with the people you got to beat. So Senna was a guy that he had to beat, wanted to beat at all costs. Not at all costs, but at most costs. And he was the benchmark, the gold standard. So there was no reason for him to be friends with him. And I think when Ayrton in 94 was not particularly comfortable at Williams, by which I mean in the cockpit of that car, and the FW15, and he was never really comfortable. And there was something not quite right with the aero at the back of the car. It was a very difficult car to drive with an unpredictable back end, which it was, and Ayrton, because he wasn't comfortable in the cockpit, was finding it all sort of double whammy and wasn't going very well. And when he had that retirement at where was it? Twin Motegi, I think it was. He had the retirement in that race, or Topolis, and he was watching out on the circuit. He convinced himself that Michael and Benetton were running illegal traction control, watching on the circuit. And when he made that point, of course, at that moment, Michael would not have taken to Ayrton at all, because that's detracting from Michael's ability to drive and accusing them of cheating, obviously. And so, obviously, at that moment, going into Imola, there's no way they would have been close mates because of that, if nothing else. Plus the normal healthy rivalry, plus Michael's wanting to beat this guy anyway. But you know how emotional he was, when he started to break Ayrton's records. and we saw how emotional Michael was and how much Ayrton meant to him and how much, it changed his life at Imola in 94. For sure, it changed Michael's view of racing as well. Yep, it was a different... Michael went on to be incredibly successful, but I'd be willing to bet that always there was that feeling of never really being close friends with Ayrton and it ending the way it did. B-WA. Peter, tell us a fuel story, please, from back in the day. Was it a Castrol product? The smell. Well, the fuel was... Sometimes it was beautiful to smell, particularly in the early days, obviously. The blend, the Castrol R and the lovely smell you'd get from high-octane fuel. I grew up on that at race meetings in Australia, in the camping overnight, in the spring, and the smell of the high-octane fuel as the engines are being warmed up in the paddock next to where we were camping, Catalina Park. Nothing to beat that. My dad always wanted trying to bottle the smell of newly mown grass, but I said, no, it's got to be the high-octane fuel and the Castrol R from Catalina Park. And he kind of, oh, yeah, okay, you're right. And but when I got... And then for a long time, in the 60s, in the 70s and 80s, and 90s, no, 70s and 80s, there was always a lovely smell in the garages after qualifying or after practice or after the race, a smell of brake fluid or testing, hot brakes, brake fluid, fuel, everything was great smell. It was when lots of additives started being put into the fuel in the 90s, late 80s and 90s, that the smell became, I can only describe it as a rugby footballer's socks that have left in the rain, worn for like 4 successive matches and then left in the rain for 3 days. That's the smell of the fuel we had at Williams in 91, 92, the ELF fuel, just so many additives. And it was very, very toxic for sure. And Jimmy Jock, our guy, Jimmy Jock Walter, our fuel guy, actually got quite a bad rash and stuff from all that. And I'm so pleased the regs are now much tighter and that doesn't happen anymore. But it was all legal and it was all to do with power. And it was a time we used to freeze the fuel as well and get as much fuel into the fuel tank as possible. So things have changed a lot. And I'm very pleased they have. And people talk about, well, should we bring back refueling? And I would hate to see refueling coming back into Formula One because the potential for disaster is still there. And we don't want that. There's nothing worse than a fuel fire. And anyway, these days, I think the fuels, there's a lot of work going on with the fuel now, but I think you'll find all the manufacturers have got their fuel and their lubricant and all the customer teams will be using the same, even if they're different brandings. But we were on the cusp of synthetic oil at Williams with Mobil 1. I think Motul had the first ever synthetic oil in competition. Motul now with McLaren. We're going back to the early 70s, but certainly Mobil 1, I think in Formula 1 probably was the first synthetic oil. Good oil. I always used to run it in my road cars. Still do if I can get it. It's not easy to get these days. Castrol, yeah, I used to put that in as well. If we can get it. Certainly here in Spain, it's difficult getting either, that's for sure. Diego Marina says, hey, hi there, good day from Madrid. Hi there, Diego. Hope it's all going well at the Mad Ring. Are we ever going to think that name works? I suppose so. I've said before, it used to be the Ring when it was the Nürburgring. Are we going to call Madrid the Ring now on the basis that the Nürburgring doesn't really exist in Formula One terms anymore? Just replying to Selecki on his nephew. You have to get him into karting, really see if he can do it and likes doing it. There's zero competition in Sri Lanka, maybe check India, otherwise Italy. Yeah, well, as I say, depends how young he is, but karting is going to be good for track craft. And obviously a little bit of skill, a certain amount of skill, they've all got to have that. But track craft, particularly racing others, starting the race, how to run the race, how to pass people, how to defend, all those things, very good in karting. But get him to see Rob as soon as possible, I would say. Edel Bendhart. Hi, Peter. Always appreciate your insights. Thank you very much. Do you have any comments regarding the degree to which the different drivers communicate with their race engineers? Some drivers seem more coached. Well, Yeah, we hear the tip of the iceberg really on the radio, and it's kind of annoying how they sort of cut the radio off when they get into the garage, because that's what we really want to hear. But in general, I think you can turn. I think mainly it's good for just hearing the tone of voice of the driver, whether he's emotional, worked up, whether he's calm, control, everything's happening as it should. You can tell a lot from the tone of voice from that, and the words they choose, and the way they speak, and the way they get back on the radio if they don't like something the engineer said, or he's asking a question, the engineer gives a sort of cynical answer. We see quite a lot of that, don't we? But I have to say there are numerous examples, particularly with Lewis, I think, of Lewis asking questions that really should have been dealt with before the session or the race started. And that constantly surprises me, that they don't have better pre-briefs or briefs before practicing the race to get through all these things that they're going to be running, and the potential of all the different strategies that they might be looking at. I assume that's what they talk about in all their briefings, but seemingly not, given some of the questions they ask or things they talk about on the radio. But again, going back to the point of it being the tip of the iceberg, bear in mind a guy like Max knows that if he wants more front end, it potentially is going to hurt the rear, but he's already worked out in his mind how he's going to handle that problem with the rear, and doesn't need to talk to the engineers about it because it's a driving thing. He knows what he's going to do with the car, how he's going to manipulate it. He then says, yeah, I can do with more front flap, and that's end of discussion. But a lesser driver will say, yeah, more front flap, but I don't want to lose the rear, and there'll be more discussion about the balance, and they'll A, lose time, B, go around in circles. And a lot of it is due to the driver not being able to, he may be able to compensate, but he doesn't know in advance what he's going to do to compensate. He's going to find out when he's in the car, and he'll do it after a lap or two. He'll work out how to do it. But Max will know long before the lap's driven exactly what he's going to do. And it's not just experience, it's native feel for the car and for the circuit and for the way he drives. David Joe Klotz. Hi Peter, I'm reading the 1993 autocourse. What is your view of Michael Andretti as a driver in Formula One? Also, I'm convinced that Mansell would have won more races than Prost and become champion sooner. Yep, I think you're right. I think Nigel would have won it in 93, although he probably would have let Prost get to him, and he probably would have lost a couple of races just from infighting with Prost. But Nigel probably would have got it. But if they'd kept, let's put it another way, if it was still Mansell Patrese in 93, Nigel would have blitzed the 93 championship. No doubt about that. Yes, Williams won it with Prost, but it was heavy going for a while, and Prost wasn't as technical in terms of running the active ride as Nigel was. And so they didn't really get the best from the car on every occasion. So it's a great shame. And I think, but it didn't affect the title. And going back to the previous question, Michael Andretti, I actually thought Michael, I think I'm probably the only person in Europe who thinks this, but I thought Michael did a pretty good job alongside Ayrton, bearing in mind it was Ayrton. And I think the Americans and a lot of the Europeans, well, let's put it, a lot of the Americans, because Michael had been very successful in America at that point, assumed that he would come over and he would be, slower than Ayrton, but not that much slower, and would be, he'd have his day, a bit like Mario Ronnie sort of thing. I guess that's what they thought. I think the Europeans wanted him to fail because he's American. A lot of these European journalists, or British more to the point, but were shocked by how much he failed. I wasn't, because I didn't have the same hopes or aspirations for him. I thought he'd get blitzed, and he actually did better than I thought. It wasn't a great car, that Williams. Yeah, I know. That McLaren. It was good in the wet. It was good on other occasions, but it wasn't the greatest car out there. And Michael was not bad. He had a good race at Monza from memory and a couple of other places. But of course, the big issue for Michael, I think, was his logistics. And I'm still astonished that Ron didn't get on top of that and allowed Michael to commute from Nazareth, Pennsylvania to each Formula One race on Concord or whatever he was doing, as Mario used to. I'm not even sure if Concord was around then, but he certainly was commuting. And he was commuting with his wife. Nothing wrong with that, you could say, but if it's McLaren and it's Ron Dennis and you know that he's the team principal, more paranoid about people on the pit wall and the look of the team and the image of the team than any other team principal in the history of the universe, why would you bring your wife who wants to be on the pit wall with a headset on? That didn't do anything to endear Michael to Ron. It didn't help Michael's cause. And obviously Sandy was not briefed by that. You can't blame her for that because it's what she did in America. But there's no way you could do that in those days with Ron Dennis. And it all went wrong from there. And then there was the commuting, the jet lag and time differences. And given all of that, as I say, I think he did a pretty good job in the race car, but he could have made it easier for himself if he'd lived in a small apartment in Woking, gone to the factory every day and lived, slept, eaten, drunk Formula One. I think he would have had a much better season. You're only racing in Formula One for a year or two. Make the most of it. Max Peter, sorry for the more trivial question. What Formula One or driving movies do you remember from years by? Well, Grand Prix made a huge impression on me in the same way that Senna made a big impression on a lot of people because they'd never seen all that background stuff behind the scenes that had been hidden away in Bernie's TV vault for so long. And so they all thought, wow, this is amazing. I felt that about Grand Prix when I saw it because I'd never really seen Formula One cars in colour, and I'd never seen Formula One cars for so long in one stretch on a screen. I'd never seen it before. And so to see, even to see Mike Spence putting on his helmet at the beginning of Grand Prix, or the throttle slides opening and the vertical shot looking down the trumpets, or the footwell shots ahead of Phil Hill. I knew it was Phil Hill's footwork. It was all just absolutely mind-blowing for me. And so because that was an impressionable age for me, no motor racing movie has ever made the same impression on me as Grand Prix. Absolutely superb. And yeah, the story is a bit hackneyed, but there's some lovely moments in it. And the music, Maurice Jarre music, is still, I still whistle it periodically, Lovely. Da, 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 da. I love that film. It was a charming film. And I love the actors and actresses in it too. I thought James Garner did a good job. And I thought Françoise Hardy was exquisite. And, really good. Loved it. Yves Montand, Eva Marie Saint. Yeah. Brian Bedford. I saw him in an episode of with Roger Moore. No, with Patrick McGowan. In what was that thing he used to do? Can't remember. Not The Prisoner, but Patrick McGowan was in something else. And Brian Bedford was in it, not being the driver that he was for BRM. Anyway, so not much else. Le Mans with Steve McQueen, just to see the cars really, and to see Steve being cool. Le Mans, pretty good. Hopeless story, but knowing all that had gone into the filming of it and how that had all been done, the David Piper accident and everything else, that was fascinating as well, I guess. That's about it, really. Boring old Peter Windsor. So another one. Sarosh Soman. Where are we? Going back to the top now of where we were. No, if it was Sarosh Soman. Come on, get going. Lots of questions coming in. I haven't got that much longer to go, to be honest. So I'll try and do another one on Thursday. Sorry, Sarosh. I said your name, and now I can't get back to where I was. Where was I? Here we go. Clear. Press clear. Yeah, just talk amongst yourselves while I find where I am on this chat here. I can't find it anymore. I'll go to some other questions in that case. 413 Tamako Road. They don't like the run what you brung approach in racing anymore. No, probably not. Nicholas, facts. Lando or Norris ain't top 5 in this sport. Well, they both had one bad race. They've driven some very good races, both of them this year. It's amazing how everybody's so negative about them. I wonder why that is. Charles better than Oscar and Lando. Well, yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that one. Soraka Kanto, drivers say it a lot in interviews, for sure. Yeah, there you go. Saying for sure is still used in New Zealand too. Racing Bull says, okay, for sure. Yeah, for sure, mate, yeah. Alex Bernardino, in F2 they say that too when they talk about Richard for sure. Sounds like for sure. Ha ha ha. Yeah, for sure, Richard for sure. Speaking of which, he's pretty good, isn't he, Richard for sure? He goes round and round every year. Nobody gives him an opportunity to do anything. And he's there, right there, thereabouts. Poor guy. The Green Hell, okay, yeah. Well, it was never called the Green Hell. That all came up in the 80s or 90s. Somebody wrote a book called The Green Hell. But I can tell you now that when we were at the Nürburgring in the 70s, there's no way anybody ever referred to it as the Green Hell, even if they thought it was the Green Hell. It wasn't called that. It's nonsense. Somebody's created that since. Grimlocky. Max is also doing it so that he can help promote sim racing to real racing. His co-driver is a sim racer. He is indeed very good iRacer, isn't he? But he's also done a lot on real track. But yeah, Max loves his sim racing, but I don't think he takes it seriously from the point of view of improving as a Grand Prix driver. He does it because when you can't drive a race car, why not do some sim racing and have some fun? Good, fair enough. Trail Break 3 says, this is the Max Verstappen hour, the MV hour. Okay, yeah, well, it probably is. He's that good, isn't he? N-triple-G-H-T. I'm not quite sure how you're supposed to pronounce that, but anyway. I think there's no such thing as the GOAT. Just best to be grateful to have seen them all at their best. Clark was great, brilliant really, but he was in a Lotus, and Chapman was the Newey of his era. Yeah, but he's also in a Lotus that was very fragile and took a lot of massaging, and that's what a lot of people forget when they say he's in a Lotus. And certainly 63, the BRM had more power than the Climax engine, and Jimmy won the championship that year. 62, the BRM had more power, and 65, Ferrari BRM pretty near the Climax as well. So I don't think he ever had a power advantage. So it was all to do with making good use of the car. And the BRM monocoque, Ferrari monocoques, very good chassis as well by then. Okay. Clark was also considered so great, at least partly because of how he went about it and his qualities as a human being, says N-triple-G-H-T. Yeah. So Lewis Hamilton, Trail Break 3, is the GOAT in my opinion. His V8 McLaren was very difficult for a rookie driver to dominate. It took Max Verstappen 6 seasons to win a gifted title. That's a bit harsh. But yeah, I would certainly say Lewis is... I mean, as I said, I'm not going to get involved with listing the greatest driver of all time, taking into account all the eras, the point scoring system, the danger, the number of races, and all the other stuff. All I would say is Lewis, until the last couple of years, has been right up there with Max, I would say, if not ahead of him in a couple of areas. So great driver. But let's see that Lewis back again. If he wants to keep racing, he's got to be that guy. Otherwise, don't go in a decline. That's what I don't want to see. I don't think anybody wants to see that. Lewis needs to be Lewis from here on in or not. He's had enough time to get used to the Ferrari. And to be Lewis, he just needs to be alongside Charles. 10th quicker, 10th slower, doesn't matter. But he doesn't want to be half a second slower. He doesn't want to be in Q2 when Charles in Q3, even if Charles is hitting the wall. AB says, hey Peter, there were videos on the internet of Max steering inputs automated without him touching anything. Is this possible? And is it legal to automate settings from the pit lane? Can you watch yourself, sir? I haven't seen them, and it's not legal, and it's so illegal that I can't imagine it's happening. And there's a lot of AI out there now on the internet, so you have to be very careful. I'm not saying that is the case, but look at those things with a pinch of salt. Just the other day I was reading, it was a video about how the Supreme Court in America has just banned all tariffs that Trump has imposed. It's not true. It's a video they did with lots of stuff that it's all created by AI. We all got to be very careful of that going forward, I think. N-triple-G-H-T says, if golf abuse was bad in the Ryder Cup, just look at sledging in cricket. The players do that, not the spectators. Even worse. Yeah. Although the sledging in the cricket is slightly different. I think the Aussies started it, didn't we start it? And isn't it all done, it used to be done pretty quietly. Just like, oh yeah, mate, you send me back in the clubhouse, mate. I wouldn't bother with that bit of chewing gum. It'd be that sort of thing. Maybe it's got completely out of hand now because of mics and people shouting and then the crowd get involved. But at the time, it was all quite witty and quite funny. There's nothing funnier than Australians when they're actually having a go at one another in a friendly, sporting activity. They're brilliant. Work Profile says, after one terrible race, everybody's on Oscar's case. But if you really want to look at racing history, Max's first 3 seasons, he had almost 15 crashes. We forget how consistent Piastri has been. Yeah. Well, Piastri's been in a championship-winning car, virtually from the day he got into Formula One. Very, very good car. And Max was often in the midfield in that Red Bull. But having said that, he did have shunts, but he learnt from them. But a lot of them were... Yeah, the brake testing thing at Monaco, you can't call that Max's fault, can you? And there were other things when he was in traffic, and it was just like, Max Verstappen here, you know, and it became a bit over the top, the sort of anti-Max stuff that was going on then. But yeah, you know, Max has definitely had his shunts. But I mean, if Oscar had been in an Alpine, do you think he wouldn't have had some shunts? See, that's the question. I'm not saying that. And that's not a reflection on the controversy about going from Alpine to McLaren. All I'm saying is he's been in a pretty good car ever since he's been in Formula One. That's all I'm saying. Whereas Max has been, initially he was in a sort of midfield car, wasn't he? Sir Lewis Hamilton is excellent on a motorbike. I'm impressed with his cornering. Valentino Rossi was highly impressed. Yeah, good. I'm sure he would be. I'm sure any Grand Prix driver, if they put their mind to it, would be good on a bike. Why wouldn't they? And bike racers can become good Grand Prix drivers. Surtees, Mike Hailwood, Agostini wasn't bad. But Graham Hill, obviously. Damon Hill. But Lewis, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what I think about MotoGP. I'm not massively into it, to be honest. Work Profile, and anyone who is saying that Oscar doesn't deserve the championship is so off. Well, there you go. I'm glad we've got some pro-Oscar, no Lando stuff here. It's all pro-Oscar. Lotus question. My father said Lotus asked his business, a brush maker, to help with side skirts, specifically adding bristles to the side skirts to help seal their floor. Does this sound familiar? Absolutely. We're talking about the beginning of 1978, when they're still running the JPS 3, I think it was called. But Peter Wright had discovered in the Imperial College wind tunnel over that winter, that if he sealed the side pods that they'd developed to the road, they would massively increase downforce, which he did in the tunnel and proved it in the Imperial College tunnel. And Chapman thought, wow, this is a breakthrough. And I think the first test was South Africa, and they went with a variety of different solutions. They went with sort of Lexan plastic side skirts and brushes, because the key was always going to be curbs and damage to the skirts and how they could get over that. And yeah, they did run brushes. Not only Lotus, we saw brushes on other cars as well. So probably, hopefully, they all bought the brushes from your dad and you made a fortune. I hope so. In the end, the brushes were not as good in terms of sealing the road, the car to the road, as a flexible skirt with a bar along the bottom, which kind of had added a bit of weight to it. But they did cause a lot of damage to the road, to the track surfaces, of course, those skirts. And they were a big deal in terms of budget, because you had to employ an extra bloke who was doing nothing but skirts on the car. Can you imagine having to pay an extra person on the race team now? Frank Williams, Ken Tyrrell, terrible. Nah, trying to keep that head count down, not up. Work Profile. It's not about being a fan, it's just stats. We put Max on a pedestal, but go back and see his first 4 years in Formula One. Oscar beats it any day. Yeah, okay. Well, you've got to take into account cars, as we said. Sid. The reason Oscar's shown so much consistency is because he's shown his true peak pace. He's always been 90 to 100% of his true pace. He hasn't been like Max or Charles, who pushed 110%. Oh, okay. I don't know how you can push 110% and stay on the road, but still. Yeah, maybe. Okay, Tisara says, it's okay, I'm an Oscar fan. Anyway, there's lots of pro-Oscar stuff, which is good. I'm pleased, because we shouldn't be negative. Right, what are we doing here? Work Profile says, I don't think Max wins the championship. It's still a 2-horse race. Oscar winning it in Vegas. Wow. Okay. Could be right. Malcolm Duncan, what was the thinking behind Frank not signing a driver after winning a championship? What's that mean? You mean keeping Nigel for 93? We wanted to keep Nigel in 93, but he wanted Prost in the other car because Renault and Elf wanted Prost. And he thought, oh, it'd be good to have a bit of fighting between those two. That'd be fun. So Nigel walked out. Frank loved to sign drivers once they were popular, and he had to outbid somebody like Ron to get him. He found that much more interesting than signing a driver when he was young and taking a bet on him and having him win races. And I know that for a fact because I introduced Mark Webber to Frank just after he won the Formula Ford Festival. And Frank said, oh, come back in a few years. I said, no, Frank, sign him now. This guy's good. He's going to win Grand Prix. You're going to want him. And sure enough, Frank wanted him and signed him sort of 4 or 5 years later and paid him a lot more money than he would have had to have had he signed him back then. But Frank didn't enjoy taking punts on young drivers like that. Wasn't his thing. He loved outbidding Ron. That was his thing. Doesn't make sense, does it? But that's true. Right. We're going to have to wind up fairly soon, guys. Let's have a look at some other interesting... Lots of interesting questions here. What are we doing here? Wow. More stuff. I don't think you can hear that thunder. Cool. Okay. Trail break 3. With all fairness, Lewis's mum and now his dog Roscoe are in a coma. A lot of weight on the man's mind. Well, this is true. This is true. And, all I would say, Roscoe, poor Roscoe, I'm a dog lover, obviously. And all I would say is that unless you have a dog you really love and you're close to, you can't imagine what that feels like. But Lewis he's an emotional guy, isn't he? He wears his heart on his sleeve. Wyland says, oops, I can't get this one to work. Wyland says, Joss is misunderstood as a top bloke. Well, I don't misunderstand him, and I think he's a top bloke. I've always got on well with Joss. He's always been a good guy, calls a spade, understands his racing, still loves the sport. I mean, what a thing to do at his age with your son winning all these races and championships. Most dads, I think at this point, would settle down on the boat in Monte Carlo and the house in wherever and go to Cape Town in the winter, wouldn't they be doing all that? And what does he do? He gets his hands dirty and does effectively Rally 2 in a Skoda RS Fabia and does really well, wins the Belgian Rally Championship, finishes second in class at the weekend, driving obviously really well. And it's not easy rallying. It's not easy at all. You don't know what's around the next corner. The conditions change. It's wet, dry, muddy. And if you get a puncture, you've got to change the tyre yourself in very, very quick time. And I really respect him for doing that. How many dads are out there doing that? I mean, we're not talking money here. It's not that expensive to do those national rallies. Yeah, it's obviously not cheap, but it's affordable. It's only in a rally Skoda Fabia, for Pete's sake. And he's out there doing it. He could have been at the Nürburgring with his son, but he wasn't. He was rallying. I think it's great. I've got a lot of time for Joss. So there's a lot of discussion. This is when I usually bail out because a lot of discussion amongst yourselves. Kano Light Racer 5 is talking to Murderer, @Murderer. And anyway, my whole chat thing's just closed down. So there you go. That's a sign that I need to end the stream now. And the storm as well. It's all happening. 11:30, 12:30, 1:30. I told my wife I'd only be doing it for just over an hour. It's over 2 hours now. So there we go. Thank you so much, everyone. It's been a lot of fun. I'll try and do another live stream, assuming people like me doing these live streams regularly. I don't know if it's a good thing to do, but I think it is. I enjoy it, and I hope you do too. So big thanks to Jetcraft, to OEM Exclusive, to REC Watches, and to Track Ninja for their support of this channel. To you, the viewer, for your support as well. And yeah, if you like it and you haven't subscribed, press subscribe. It's free, no money involved. I was having a discussion with a mate of mine who flies for Virgin. He's a pilot. He's the command pilot for Virgin. What do you call him? Chief pilot? I don't know, I've forgotten. It does the Atlantic route. And you're saying, oh, Peter, I love your channel, but how much is it to subscribe? You've got so many subscribers. You must be so wealthy. Come on, give me a break. Anyway, some people think that. So subscribe and, let other people know about the channel if you like it. Anyway, thanks for watching. See you again very soon.